What prevents you from taking action? What prevents people from joining a movement or a cause? Oftentimes it's fears and doubts. These things prevent people from moving forward. There might be fears that you might be judged, fears of failure. You could have doubts of your ability to make a contribution, doubts that anything will change. You could worry about consequences of an action. For example, there could be retaliation or violence or arrest or even loss of relationships. For example, you could have a good friend or a family member that has a problematic way of thinking or some outdated ideals, and by addressing that, you could jeopardize that relationship. These are very common feelings, and people often have them even if they're participating in movements. And actions have to take place in spite of these things. So there's a quote here, and it says, "At once I was feeling and filled with fear." Now this was a quote that was written by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in his autobiography. He was talking about the time that he wrote that first speech for the Montgomery bus boycott. He only had 20 minutes to prepare his speech, and he said that he wasted the first 5 minutes in a state of anxiety. This is Dr. King, arguably one of the greatest orators in U.S. history, certainly one of the greatest civil rights leaders. And he said he was possessed by fear. Of course, he went on and finished his speech and went out and done it. But he wasn't the only one that had these concerns or these doubts or these fears. There were people who were concerned with retaliation from white people who might not like what they were about to do. There were people who thought that this retaliation could occur and that the leaders of the movement might need to remain anonymous. Even Dr. King himself was reluctant to get involved, not because he wasn't supportive of equality, but because he thought that this bus boycott could cause hardship, and that was not in line with some of his personal beliefs and his religious views. So see, even among people that do the work and participate, there can be this internal doubt, these fears and these conflicts. I was having a conversation recently with a colleague of mine, and it's kind of like another conversation that I've had with other people. And they wanted to use their platform and their network to highlight some issues that were important to them, to get into a little bit of activism. However, they were concerned that maybe using their platform might not have been appropriate. And they were wondering how it might be received either by followers or people that they're connected with. They thought about other ways, maybe speaking, but public speaking really wasn't their thing. They couldn't speak in public. They were really nervous about it, so they didn't think that was a route for them. And simply, another reason is they just didn't know where to start. See, that's also very common. People don't know where to start or how to start. There's a famous quote by ancient Chinese philosopher and the author of the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu. And he says, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step." Now, it's pretty evident in this meaning, right, that no action can start without taking that first step. No progress, nothing can start without that first step. But there's another quote from Lao Tzu that I really like, and I don't hear it quoted that often. And it's, "Every step is on the path." Now, most people might apply this to personal journeys, right? Something that takes you from where you are now to where you want to be or who you want to become or how you got to the position that you're at, right? So it's saying that every experience, every moment, successes or failures or encounters, all are steps on that path of whatever that journey is. Now, I think this can be applied to other things as well. I think it can be applied to movements in particular, because a movement is a collection of people and actions, and not always in the same place, that are all done towards a common goal. They're all steps towards something on that same path. So I think this is important to know, because that means contributions, large and small, whether they're done alone or they're done somewhere else, can all be steps on that path towards that goal. I did a webinar with a university in Tokyo last year, and I was one of 3 guest speakers. And we did presentations. It was on racism and discrimination, particularly focused on history of the U.S. and what was happening with African Americans and what still happens today. And after the presentations were over, we had a Q&A session. And there was a question by a young woman. And she started off by saying that the more she learns about these things, about racism and discrimination, the more overwhelming it seems to be able to combat. And so her question to me was, how could I make an impact? Now, how would you answer that? She's not wrong. It's a very overwhelming situation, a very overwhelming issue. It's very large and it permeates in a lot of things. But again, we have these fears and these doubts and these worries and concerns that, as I said, many people, even doing the work, have these on the inside. And I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing people with BLM Tokyo, and a lot of them were volunteering for the very first time in any sort of activism capacity. And these were world-class talents. They showed a lot of dedication. They came with their ideas, showed a lot of compassion, and we did a lot of good work. But even amongst them, and while doing the work, there were some of these fears, concerns, and doubts. From some who maybe had leadership put on them that were unsure if they could actually fill the role, or if they could, deal with the expectations that were put upon them or carry the burden on them, or if they themselves were able to contribute enough compared to other people in the team. See, even amongst the projects that we were doing, some were like, well, these are great projects, and we knew they were great projects. They're wondering, will this be enough? Will it change anything? I mean, we've often heard things like, oh, my vote won't count, or nothing ever changes. And I understand that feeling, because even myself, to be honest, I also feel that sometimes. In America, black bodies continue to pile up at the hands of police. Black Americans are almost 3 times as likely to be killed by police as white Americans. In recent news, there was a black couple whose home was appraised at a significantly higher rate when they sent their white friend in to pretend it was their home. So even among all the work that's being done, I can still feel sometimes it doesn't change. Anytime you have setbacks, maybe there's some failures, or things don't go the way that you hoped or planned, these types of things still come up. And these are things that take place in conversations, in meetings behind closed doors, maybe not out front, or interpersonally between people. So I understand that idea, and it's difficult to make an impact. But see, what the young woman didn't realize, she missed one point. This event that we had, this webinar event, since it was a webinar, people could join from wherever. And so we had people that came to the webinar, that attended from different places, from the United States, from Japan, of course, from different countries in East and Southeast Asia and in Europe. And they all came to this event to learn about the topics that we are speaking out, to participate in the dialogue, to participate in the discourse, to ask questions and have their questions answered. And this event was put together by a multicultural team of students and faculty members. And this young woman was one of the main organizers. She was one of the lead organizers. Matter of fact, she was the one that extended the invitation to me to be a part of the panel. And so what she missed was that she was part of the catalyst to bring all of this together, because these people that came were also going to be able to leave with something. So of course my answer to her was that you're already making an impact. She was already taking steps on that path. So you can be overwhelmed and people can feel like it's overwhelming. We can't make an impact because we are faced with such incredible adversity. We're faced with a status quo that doesn't work for the majority of people. We're faced with things like economic issues, also racism and discrimination. We're faced with fighting for fair wages and for livable wages, affordable costs of living, fighting for health care, fighting for nutritious food and clean water. Most of the world doesn't have clean water. Even in the United States, there were water issues. Most recently was in Mississippi. Most famously was in Flint, Michigan, and my home state. And then, of course, we're dealing with ever-growing extremes of weather that's the result of climate change that is not going to change anytime soon. So there is a lot to be done. And there's always someone, some group, some organization, or some issue that needs help. So what I want to say is that if you feel there's something that you want to take part in, some issue that needs to change that you think is not right, I say despite the fears, despite the doubts, despite the concerns, despite the worries, you should do it. Because you can't do everything, of course, but you can do something. So you should do it. Use your social media following, or call organizations and see if you can volunteer, be a part of something, or even deal with your own personal issues and biases. Be part of that change. Be yourself. Have those conversations amongst your peers and in your group. Because I tell you, the world needs you. The world needs your voice. It needs your time. It needs your ability. It needs your skills. It needs your compassion. It needs your efforts. The world needs you to take that step on that path. Thank you.